is the presentation on Module 2, which is about mentoring roles. Mentoring is usually broken down into two kinds of outcomes: relational outcomes, which include motivation, interpersonal skills, things to do with confidence, creating a safe space to learn and being socially supported, a lot of reflection and introspection. Then there are the career outcomes, which have to do with compensation, promotion, and perceived success. This includes being a role model of the type of person that the mentee might want to be, to help the mentee develop networks and capabilities that will help them in their career. I just want to stress that there are 3 ground rules in the mentoring relationship that seems to be common across all disciplines. The first is that the mentor-mentee discussion is confidential. The second is that the mentee determines what the goals are and not the mentor. And the third is, and probably the one that is most important in terms of keeping the relationship going, is to create some sort of structure to the relationship. That means you have a beginning, middle, and end, and that you have regular times where you meet. At each meeting, you have an objective. And at the end of the relationship, you assess what you have gotten out of it, both mentor and mentee. Other roles that are commonly affiliated with mentorship is coach and sponsor. The coach, and I think you could think of it in terms of athletic coach, is really task-centered, teaches the mentee skill sets that they might need. It's task-oriented. And the learning is driven by the coach because the coach knows or has more skills in the area. A sponsor is something that is more common in the American setting and not really looked upon as valuable in a European or other setting. And that is really the person that gives exposure and visibility to the mentee, the person that can open doors, perhaps propose challenging challenges that stretch boundaries, but also the sponsor provides protection. I think if you look very carefully at mentoring across all of the literature, it is really something that follows a huge tradition. In Asia, the concept of the guru, of course, goes across religions and philosophies and has very, very deep roots. But I think it's very important to acknowledge that there are positive and negative aspects of mentoring. In some cases, the mentor gets more out of the relationship than the mentee. It can be effective or ineffective, unfortunately. In some traditional hierarchical cultures, it could be very one way. There can be manipulation along with confirmation and acceptance. There can be friendship, but there can also be negative intent. It can be formal or informal, and definitely it changes over time. I just want to point out that mentees aren't the only one who need mentoring. There was a myth of the teacher plateau that most of the learning and changing in teacher effectiveness happens in the first 3 years, as you can see from these graphs, this exponential rise in the first 3 years, and that nothing much happens after that. Well, that actually isn't true. In studies of teachers, they've found that 35% of effectiveness actually happens after 10 years. So we all need mentoring. We all need to improve our effectiveness. And it's important to understand that this can only happen in an environment that's consistent with order and discipline, where peers collaborate, and that's where mentorship comes in, where there is supportive leadership and effective professional development, where we have a culture based on trust, and where evaluations are fair with meaningful feedback. A lot of this, I feel, is part of the mentoring relationship. So I just want to point out that organizations have tried for many, many years to come up with a training that will transform them. And definitely diversity inclusion is one of those areas. It's now a $7.5 billion industry that's projected to double by 2026. And pretty much all the large companies and nearly half of the mid-sized companies have diversity training in an effort to transform their organizations. The bad news is that most of these programs, which are really quite generously funded, don't work. And why are they popular? I think for many reasons, companies want to show that they're doing something in the case of lawsuits against the company. And this seems to be something that they can say they are doing. Unfortunately, these training programs are not sustainable. So what does work? And this comes from over a decade of research. Diverse recruiting works, and we are doing that. And that's actually part of our mentoring program because we bring in new faculty. Diversity councils or managers that identify specific problems and solutions, that works. But what they've found is that mentoring programs show strong positive effects in diversity and inclusion. So I am very pro mentoring as a way to transform our college. So in module 2, we have one assignment. And so one of the things you will be doing is working with your mentee on teaching. And that can involve many of the roles in mentoring. Class observations are one of the main tools that we use to improve teaching, but we really haven't looked very closely at that tool. So I'm asking you to do so. Create a format for class observation of your mentee. That's one of the things that the tenure track mentors will be having to do in their first quarter. Reflect on what roles, and here are the many, many roles, right? It's more than the roles that I even just went through: mentor, coach, connector, sponsor, taskmaster, motivator, dreamer, sage, proofer, that you can take in class observation. So the goal is to understand the different roles of the mentor and really try to exercise the ones that seem appropriate for your relationship. I've included a reading here, which kind of thinks out of the box about mentoring roles. And in the assignment itself, there will be some sample class observations that you can feel free to use or create those of your own. I'm very interested to see what kind of class observations you come up with.